Hey, it's Kim, your mental health nurse practitioner, and I am here to pick another card from the Upward Spiral card deck. I've been using this deck to do one video a week. We are, according to the book, using neuroscience to reverse the course of depression one small change at a time. I will link to that book and the card deck and the workbook in the description. But the card deck does have 52 cards. So I began on January 1st. Once a week, I'm going to pick one card at random, not going in order. And we will address one thing a week that we can do to reverse the course of depression. So this week, the card that I have chosen is an awareness card, which means it's an information card instead of an action card. And it is card number 8. It is the habit spiral. And it says that habits help you make automatic decisions by relying on old routines or choosing whatever is most immediately pleasurable. We have habits of action, interaction, thinking, and emotion. You can train yourself to have more positive habits by recognizing triggers, changing your surroundings, making new choices, reducing stress, and rewarding yourself. So, when I think about habits, especially habits of thought, I think there's an analogy that I use all the time when sometimes I have groups at work and I try to explain the way that we can kind of like restructure our thought patterns because our thoughts can fall into habits. And we actually talked last week about identifying some unhelpful thoughts. So what happens is when we're suffering from depression or anxiety, depression and anxiety can kind of sway our thoughts so that we may tend to look at stuff in a more negative light. Meaning, if we're getting ready to do something, we might just automatically be worried about the worst possible outcome. Instead of thinking, well, you know what, things can go well, we might always be worried about what can go wrong. Or if we're looking at something that had stressed us out from the past or an event, we might just kind of look at it from a glass as half empty sort of perspective instead of a glass as half full. And that becomes habit. So the analogy that I use is our minds and the paths that our thoughts follow are like a forest, like the wilderness. And when my kids were little, I used to take them on this hike through the woods up the mountainside. And there was always a well-worn path that we would follow. And you would notice along that path that, different forest animals, the deer and other things that maybe we don't want to run into in the forest were anyway, the animals would all run that same path and everybody would run that same path. And maybe the small anyway, I'm going to get off. I'm going to not go on a tangent about where the bunnies go. But anyway, people, when we get to the woods and we're going to go from point A to point B, we see this well-worn path and that's the one we're going to follow. That's kind of automatic. Now, if we wanted to go somewhere else in the forest, we would have to forge a new path. And the first time that we're forging that path, it's going to be, we've got to just take down weeds. We're going to get, just scratched up with sticker bushes and everything else. And we've got to really work on that path. And then we've got to take that path every single day, or at least pretty regularly, until that path becomes worn down enough. And if we take it often enough, then the first path that we used to always take, the weeds and everything else is going to start growing up on that path. And then the next time that we get to those woods and we want to go from point A to point B, it's the new path that we're going to just automatically take. And probably the animals too are going to start taking that path because when you get there, it's just the one that's ready to be walked on. It's the easiest one to follow. So in our minds, when we have paths forged through our minds that take us towards negative thoughts, towards worry and anxiety and despair, one of the things that we have to do to build new habits of thought is to help forge that new path. And when we first do it, it can be difficult. When, we say something like, have a gratitude journal, and every single day try to think of 3 or 4 things, or 5, or however many, try to write down things that you're grateful for. When we talk about, goal setting, or like imagining your future if things go right, those kind of things at the beginning, it might be a chore. It might be like, oh, I've got all these weeds grown up. I got sticker bushes. I don't even know if I can walk that path. It's going to be difficult. But the more often you walk that path, if you set a goal to do that every day, if you start recognizing negative thoughts, or thoughts that are unproductive or even destructive, and you start catching those, and then you start thinking about, we are going to rephrase those thoughts in a more positive light, eventually that new path is going to become your habit. It's going to become your go-to. And before long, once you develop those habits, you're going to automatically walk that path. It's going to become natural. It's going to become the easier path. And ultimately, when you start to reframe these habits, and these thoughts, and these emotions, you're going to begin to reverse that spiral of depression, and slowly, again, one step at a time, lift yourself up out of it. So this is the habit spiral. Sometimes we have habits, and those habits can serve the downward spiral of depression and anxiety. But if we begin to recognize it, and we begin to work on changing those habits, we can reverse that spiral. And it doesn't happen overnight. It takes work. It takes some effort. But it's not a huge change that you have to do, just a tiny little change, one step at a time. So give yourself a pat on the back for even thinking about making a little change, because every little thing that you do for you is a part of those little changes that need to be made to help lift yourself up. And that is the end of this video. Thank you for watching. Apologies if you heard the dogs barking in the background. I got the front door open, so they're seeing everybody walking down the road. I will put links in the description to the Upward Spiral book, which is awesome. If you have the chance to read it, get this book, read it. He just does an awesome job. I think everybody who suffers from depression or anxiety, or if you have somebody you love who suffers from depression or anxiety, and you know what the truth is who in this world doesn't at some point have at least some bit of, anxiety or depression. So I don't think there's anybody that this book is not going to help. And also it does have a workbook which can be purchased. I'll link that too. I don't have the workbook. I probably need to get the workbook, don't I? I might go ahead and order it just so I can talk about that a little bit too. But the card deck, again, 52 cards. You could just pick up the cards, however you like to. Pick them up one at a time and just be like, I'm going to do one card a day. Like I said, for the sake of this video, I decided to do one card a week. So if you'd like to see what I talk about for the rest of the year while I go through the rest of these 52 cards, make sure you hit like, make sure you subscribe to my channel, and then, hey, I'll see you next week. Thank you for joining me.